Good lordy lord. Okay, we're trying again. We've got like 4 different internet connections in our house, and sometimes it jumps on the wrong one. But anyway, welcome back. I'm going to start again because I don't know how to edit videos on YouTube yet. Welcome everyone to A Speech a Week. My name is Pippa. I'm a professional actress. I trained and lived in the UK. That's where I'm based. But I'm overseas at the moment. And we are going to be looking at Proteus's speech from the Two Gentlemen of Verona. Indeed, he has more than one. So just to clarify, we're looking at even as one heat, another heat expels, Act 2, Scene 4. And really simply, we're going to workshop this. This is a safe space. We're going to experiment with it a little bit, and we're going to translate it, figure it out together, and have a little play with it, essentially. So let me know that you're back on live. Rodney, I only just saw your live comments like after it all cut out. So I think my internet was lagging anyway. So please let me know that you can hear me and everything clearly now. Let's get into it. Just a quick breakdown. Proteus has just spoken to his best friend Valentine. He's not long arrived in Milan. He's come from Verona, and Valentine has just gone on a little rant about how amazing this woman is that he's met, and they promised to be married. They're gonna run away into the sunset and have a lovely romantic thing. Valentine is ranting and raving about how cool and brilliant and lovely this amazing person is, this woman is. And Proteus, although he's promised to Julia back home and he's in love with his girlfriend back home, has suddenly flipped and gone, oh, is it my mind or Valentine's praise? Or what's going on here? Like, why am I suddenly now absolutely enamored with this Sylvia woman who I've not even really spoken to? She's just walked by, and he's like, what? And this monologue is about him kind of exploring that and talking to us, the audience, delving into his feelings and what he's thinking, sharing that with us. So here we go. Rodney says, can see in here now. Good. Exactly. So Rodney says here, apparently Proteus was a shape-shifting Roman god. This is where I was getting up to. Shakespeare would have known about him, but he would not have known the bacterium. Yes. So before we cut out, I was talking about the fact that the term Proteus in modern vernacular, by definition, means an intestinal bacteria found in animals or soil, which is gross, right? Like, dirty. He's literally an infecting bacteria. However, the term Proteus was also a Roman god, and it's based on Greek as well, but essentially he was a shape shifter, which means he's a kind of, the term I saw was mercurial kind of guy who can bend his appearances at will. And this was a connection I wanted to make as well, that people believe, scholars believe, that Proteus was a forerunner for Iago in Othello. And Iago in Othello is the ultimate shapeshifter in Shakespeare's plethora of plays, isn't he? We know him as the character that deceives everyone and is the most mischievous of all, and probably the most evil. So I absolutely see that connection between Iago and Proteus. However, Two Gents as a play is a lot more lighthearted, but it does get really dark. The ending is a bit wrapped up too quickly, in my opinion. And that's why often I think it isn't done, and people do kind of poo-poo Two Gents as a bit of like a practice run for Shakespeare, but it is actually an amazing play. So if you haven't read it yet fully, I highly recommend you do. Watch it as well, but do read the transcript that you've got, because often they cut things and add things in, and it's worth seeing the ending for what it is at the moment. But we're not going into that at the moment. We're only going up to Act 2, Scene 4, and we're going to look at Proteus's speech. So Valentine has just rant and raved about Sylvia. Proteus has said, all right, I'll catch up with you in a moment. And now he's turned to the audience and he's letting his thoughts come out of his mouth with us. Okay. So I did read it already, but I'm going to read it again. And let's see what comes of it for you. This isn't me trying to impress you with my acting. I'm not trying to be an outstanding Proteus for you here. I'm just merely lifting it off the page. So let's see what happens here. Even as one heat, another heat expels, or as one nail by strength drives out another, so is the remembrance of my former love. So the remembrance of my former love is by a newer object quite forgotten. Is it my mind or Valentine's praise? Her true perfection, or my false transgression that makes me reasonless to reason thus. She is fair. And so is Julia, that I love. That I did love. For now my love is thaw'd, which like a waxen image gainst the fire bears no impression of the thing it was. Methinks my zeal to Valentine is cold, and that I love him not as I was wont. Oh, but I love his lady too much, and that's the reason I love him so little. How shall I dote on her with more advice, that thus without advice begins to love her? 'Tis but her picture I have yet beheld, and that hath dazzled my reason's light. But when I look on her perfections, there is no reason but I shall be blind. If I can check my erring love, I will. If not, to compass her, I'll use my skill. Gave you a little wink at the end there. I don't know if how I did it then was the right way to do it. And to be honest, I don't know the lines. So I did flounder a few times getting those through. But how did that feel listening to that? What did you think of that very simple character I portrayed to you now? Because we're going to go into a lot more depth. That was it lifted off the page. Let's have a little look now and see how we can translate it, how we can figure it out, and dive into a little bit more and see what he's actually saying here. So Valentine has said, will you make haste? Proteus says, I will. Already, I think he's saying, yeah, I'll come. But he doesn't come straight away. So already, And the first point I was going to make is about the whole Proteus as a shapeshifter. He is a character who changes depending on his environment. So bearing that in mind, I don't think necessarily he's an evil, wicked man and turning to the audience like an evil person. He's a young kid who's in love with a girl back home, but has just found someone else who he also is in love with. And he's figuring this out. This is his initial thought process. So it's really important that we think on the line, that we are figuring it out as we go. As always with Shakespeare, that's a really important key. You've always got to figure it out on the line as you go. There is no pre-knowing with Shakespeare's characters quite often. So, even as one heat, another heat expels, or as one nail by strength drives out another, so the remembrance of my former love is by a newer object quite forgotten. So that was where I stumbled a little bit. I said, so is the remembrance, or something like that. So the remembrance of my former love is by a newer object quite forgotten. So there's 4 lines that run on there. So first thing I would say is I'd break it up. I'd see where the punctuation ends using exclamation marks or question marks or full stops. That 4 lines, I think we need to drive it through. I think that's really important because we've got an enjambment, a punctuationless enjambment on the first line and on the third line, and then the full stop on the last. Even as he's saying, like, just like one heat will drive out another heat, or a nail by a stronger nail will be driven out, my love for Julia is like that. He's comparing and using these analogies of heat and nails, we'll talk about these as well in just a moment, to express that his love for Julia is now quite forgotten. That's something of the past and it has changed. So the key thing here really is, so the remembrance of my former love is by a newer object quite forgotten. And depending on where you're going to position Julia and Sylvia and Valentine in your mind's eye as the character, make sure you make it really clear what you're saying here. So the remembrance, so my memory of my former love, my previous lover, my previous relationship, is by a newer object. So a remembrance and newer already are quite, and former, sorry, so former and newer and remembrance, they're opposing images, right? So really make sure you're picking these words out. A newer object quite forgotten. So it's quite interesting as well. He uses the word object. He doesn't say by a newer woman or a newer mistress. He says object. So already we're getting little clues into his psyche here, I think. He likes the next shiny thing. Who do you know who's like that? Or what does that tell you about a person if they just are picking something up and dropping it as soon as something else better comes along? In that 4 lines, we've already got a really good clue about him. So going back to the imagery and the language that's being used, even as one heat, another heat expels, or as one nail by strength drives out another. I really like the nail one, but let's start with the heat. If you think of heat, what do you think of? Candles, fires, passion, temperature. He's just gone to Milan as well, remember. So Milan, back in these days, would have been probably quite an exciting place. It's like you're being Lawrence in Two Gentlemen of Verona. I have to step away for a few minutes, dog walking time. Don't worry, Rodney. Thank you so much for joining thus far. Anyway, I've lost what I was saying. Heat, fire, all of these things, right? So he's talking about one passion perhaps being driven out by another passion. Even as one heat, another heat expels. As one nail by strength drives out another. So nails as well. I just want to talk about this. A nail penetrates a piece of wood as well. So subtly, I don't think it's necessarily a sexual connotation thing here, but I do feel like one nail by strength drives out another. There's an imagery of forcing here. And with the heat as well, I kind of think of nature. And like I said, that's it. I was saying he's in Milan, so it might be a hotter climate. There's more heat going on here than there was perhaps in Verona. So I think they're really interesting analogies, and I won't draw on them too much more now. But they are, I think, have a play with them and explore with them about what they mean to you and see. Or as one nail by strength drives out another. By strength drives out another. As well, strength, force. It's this sense of force, I think, is quite important here. And as a young man, I don't know, back in these days, Proteus also translates to firstborn. So as a firstborn son, going back to Lear and Edmund's speech and all of his relationship with Edgar, we can see what it is like being an illegitimate, but also being the eldest and having more of those responsibilities. Going back to Hamilton with Peggy, Angelica, and Eliza, Angelica's the oldest woman. She has to step up and behave a certain way. So I don't know, I feel like Proteus maybe has an edge about him where he's used to getting what he wants and has had it quite easy. That's my opinion. Please make up your own opinion and decide for yourself. But again, this idea of strength, I feel like maybe he's starting to feel all of that power that he has as a man arise. And I think that is something that could be explored throughout the play, as I do think it is a coming of age play. So those are the first lines. Even as one heat, another heat expels, or as one nail by strength drives out another, so the remembrance of my former love is by a newer object quite forgotten. Full stop. So it's a statement. Hello, Ernest. Oh, never mind. Welcome. You've made it anywho. We've just done the first 4 lines for now. We're moving along to the 5th onwards now. So that's a statement, that first section. Even as one heat, I'm going to say it again because I want to get it in my vernacular so I can do it better the second time around. Even as one heat, another heat expels, or as one nail by strength drives out another, so the remembrance of my former love is by a newer object quite forgotten. And I love that, quite forgotten. It's a realization, I think. Oh, she's been driven out. Julia has been driven out by Sylvia. Interesting. And now he's asking a question. He's got kind of a few thoughts going on there. He says, is it my mind or Valentine's praise, her true perfection, or my false transgression that makes me reasonless to reason thus? I think it's such a good line. That makes me reasonless to reason thus. It's like beat poetry. Oh, so good. So he's asking a question here. And I think this is a genuine question. Top tip for you if you are acting Shakespeare or any text. Even if it's written that your character doesn't get a response, they have got to ask the question. It's never rhetorical. He's still, even if it is rhetorical, it's still a rhetoric device used and a skill and a not a skill, but a technique and a tactic used by the character to promote and provoke thought within you or the other character or the audience, okay? So ask the goddamn question, okay? So he says, is it my mind? So that's the first question really, isn't it? Is it my mind? Is it my brain? Is it me that is thinking this? Or Valentine's praise? So there he's recapping the previous scene where Valentine has just been like, what has he even actually said? Why, man, she is mine own, and I as rich in having such a jewel as 20 seas, if all their sand were pearl, the water nectar, and the rocks pure gold. See how ridiculously over the top and melodramatic and poetic and fabulous all of that language is. He's saying she is such a jewel. So here Proteus is recapping all of that conversation he's literally just had with Valentine and saying, or is it Valentine's praise that is making me feel this way? So as we go through these, I want you to think, you're asking, is it my mind that's making me feel this way? Is it Valentine's praise that is making me feel this way? Or next, her true perfection. So she has just walked by, he's just seen her, and then Valentine is all like, she's amazing, she's the best thing on the planet. So now he's questioning, is it her true perfection? Is it the fact that she is gorgeous and beautiful and sexy and everything that I've never seen before that makes me feel this way about her? And then there's another one, or my false transgression. Or my false transgression. There's a reason why that phrase is a little bit difficult to say. And I think it's because Shakespeare wants us to slow down and also for Proteus to maybe enjoy it, really get the muscularity of that word out. So just defining transgression, I mean, I think we can, again, what springs to mind before I look at the definition? I think aggression, trans something, a change. I think you already, and this is the key with Shakespeare, even though you don't know the definition of the word, the sounds and the kind of minute details of the word that you can figure out will still give you a general idea of what that word means. However, if you are a professional actor or trying to be, it's really important that you do know the definition of these words and you look up their origins and where they come from, just so you've got a solid base on it and it's not just guesswork. Guesswork is no good. So transgression, an act that goes against law, rule, or code of conduct, an offense. My false transgression. So already there's a contradiction there as well. So this is something really important to pick out. A transgression is something that is already breaking the law or an oath or what was it? It said there, an offense, going against a rule. But he's saying it's a false transgression. So is it a false rule breaking? So already we can see that Proteus is conflicted about the fact that this is a bad thing. Do you see what I'm saying there? And the fact is he has no moral compass makes you think, maybe he is a bit more of an unempathetic psychopath here. And like I mentioned earlier, that forerunner for the Iago character in Othello. So those two words have made me realize, and hopefully all of us realize now, that he does not quite see that this is wrong. And that's really important to get with Proteus. I think, excusez-moi, I think he is not necessarily naive, but unaware of the consequences of his actions. And I think he's just going with the flow and really not thinking about the repercussions of what could happen. Ronnie's back, says hello, Ernest. So what do you think? Any other thoughts on that, anyone? Let me know. And if you're not watching live, remember you can comment below and I will read all of your comments and try and get back to you as fast as I can. But I love hearing from you, so do let me know what you're thinking at this point. So going back then, is it my mind? Is it that thing? Is it Valentine's praise? Is it her true perfection? Or is it my false transgression that makes me reasonless to reason thus? So reasonless to reason thus. So let's just look up reason. We mostly know what reason means, but again, we don't want guesswork to be the basis of our acting. We want to have facts and true definitions of words in our mind's eye as we're doing these things. So reason is a cause, an explanation, or justification for an action or event. It's also the power of the mind to think, understand, and form judgments by a process of logic. So going back to this false transgression statement, we can see that Proteus is actually already conflicted about the situation, but also not really sure that it's a bad thing. And then here we've just got a kind of reiteration of that makes me reasonless. If you're reasonless, you are mad. You are lacking logic. And then he says to reason thus. It's making me not want to reason thus, and it's making me mad. Kind of thing, working it around a little bit. So that makes me reasonless to reason thus, to figure this out. I don't even want to figure this out. I don't even want to logic this out and find an explanation. He's asking this question. He's thinking, is it this? Is it that? Is it that? Is it this? That makes me not even care what it is. That's what I think he's saying here, if that makes sense. Ernest says a valid transgression would be like MLK or Thorio. How do you say that? I.e. civil disobedience. This he knows is wrong and he does it anyway. Exactly. And it's reiterated again in the final couplet, which we'll get to. No moral high ground attained. Precisely. And I think all these words are really good to have in mind for Proteus, like no morals, no compass, no moral compass, no empathy, no... I genuinely think he is a forerunner to Iago, and I genuinely think he is a psychopath. Although that wasn't a term that was really used back in those days, I imagine. It's only recently been depicted, and I talk about this quite a lot just because I find it all so interesting. There was a book I was reading about a woman who was married to a man who had about 10 different wives. This is all true story. And he just kept lying to all these people, saying that he was infertile, that he worked for the military or MI5, so he had to go away for days at a time. And he would go out of his way to manipulate situations and say things that had, like, you know, cut his arm and say he did it in combat and things like this, like genuinely believing his own bullshit to some extent and not realizing the gravitas and the effect he was having on all these other people. Lacking empathy entirely. There are people out there like that, and they're not necessarily, you know, that big and that crazy, but it's a real thing that we have as human beings. Some of us just lack part of the brain that can access this caring, empathetic side of us that understands there are consequences to our actions. And there are some, and they often are the kind of people that commit mass murders. And, you know, I find all of this sort of psyche stuff really interesting. So look into it by all means. But I do think Proteus is a younger boy of this that is, you know, it's like going back to theme, and I think it's very important for this play, but going back to the idea that violence against women is a man's issue. That's very relevant to this play, by the way. If you haven't read it yet, please read it. And the ending is very much all wrapped up in all of that. He's like the younger boy who is just catcalling and thinking it's okay to slap a woman's ass in a pub. And then he grows into Iago, who thinks it's actually okay to beat up women, i.e. his wife, Amelia, which he does. He thinks it's okay to manipulate people and commit murder and encourage other people to commit murder, and that's okay. So I feel like there is a kind of coming of age throughout the plays, but also Proteus is like the lower level at the moment. Maybe not by the end of the play, which we could go on to. So Rodney says as well, risk benefit for based on Proteus thinks he can get away with. Definitely, but I don't even think he sees it as a risk yet. I think he's just like, this is interesting. Let's go with it. I think he's that black and white. I'm feeling this, so let's go with this. Although there is a little bit of doubt. If I can check my erring love, I will. If not, to compass her, I'll use my skill. But we'll get to that. But yeah, I think he's just like, well, she's hot and I'm here, so let's go with it. He's very in the moment, off the cuff. Reason is and ought to be the slave of the passions. David Hume. Lovely. Excuse me. Reason makes the land changes. Passion determines the road we take. Lovely. Interesting. If you think Mr. Hume is correct, land changes, not land changes. Land changes, not land change. I'm confused by that. We are driven by our passions, rationalize with our reason. Absolutely. Knee-jerk reactions always come from lane. I was about to say, you said the same thing twice. Lane changes, not land changes. So reason is and ought to be the slave of passions. Reason makes the lane changes. Passion determines the road we take. Yeah, lovely. Well put. But exactly, our knee-jerk reactions to things and our gut reactions to things are feelings, not logic, quite often. So Proteus, I think, is reacting to his feelings of passion for Sylvia and deciding in this monologue, fundamentally, to not reason and not use logic. So again, there could be that decision. So I'm saying he's a bit of a psychopath and not even aware of this, but maybe there is actually part of him in this speech that is choosing not to reason with logic. He's actively choosing to go down this, to change lane and go down that road. So interesting. He could change back again and go down the right road, but he doesn't, despite all the reasons. And all the reasons are Valentine, Julia, and Sylvia, really. Sylvia's promise to Valentine. So, Anyway, so is it my mind or Valentine's praise, her true perfection or my false transgression that makes me reasonless to reason thus? Even before that question finishes, he's already expressed that he's reasonless because he thinks his transgression is a false one. James Hesling in the building. Bless him. Thinks he's invisible. What's that character in Guardians of the Galaxy that says you can't see him? Drax. He thinks he's Drax from Guardians of the Galaxy. Hilarious. I'm moving so slowly that you can't see me. So, the true perfection of my faith makes me reasonless to reason thus. He's already saying that he's reasonless. So this makes me think he already is. He's decided. Interesting, huh? So then moving along, he talks about Sylvia. So he's jumped from like, why aren't I reasoning with myself? Why am I reasonless to reason about this, to think logically about this? She is fair. And then he jumps to Sylvia about how beautiful she is. And fair, remember that word carries weight. It's not just she is fair, like she's pretty. It is like fair, like she is fit. She is hot, hot, hot. And that's what, it needs to have that kind of like fit. Yeah, and that's a word that we used to say in England. I don't know if it's an Americanism or not really, but you go, oh, they're well fit. You're like, yeah, they're fit, they're hot. And yeah, use that word. She is fair. I think it could be used as a justification there. So why am I reasonless to think logically about this? Because she's hot stuff. Because she's sexy. Because she's cool. Because she's like the dream. But then there's a semicolon and he goes on to think about his former love. So now we do see a little bit of a conflict here. She is fair. And so is Julia that I love. Julia's fair too. Like she's fit too. They're not any better or worse. Let's imagine they're on the same plane. Crazy, sexy, cool. Exactly. That's what he's thinking. She is fair. And so is Julia that I love. And then he corrects himself. That I did love. So already we're seeing this shape-shifting, figuring out on the line. He says he loves her, and then straight after, in his next breath, or on the same breath, he says that I did love. Well, I did love her. So it's so interesting. And then he goes on to explore that using some analogies here about wax and fire. So he says, she is fair. And so is Julia that I love, that I did love. For now, my love is thaw'd. So thaw'd, if you thaw something out, you melt it, don't you? You not melt it, you defrost it. Like Mariah Carey singing her song at Christmas. For now, my love is thaw'd, which like a waxen image gainst a fire bears no impression of the thing it was. He's essentially saying a fire has got my waxen, let's say you had like a doll of Julia made out of wax, carved out of wax for him to take. By the heat, it just melts. It doesn't resemble the thing it did before. So he's figuring this out as he goes. But For now my love is thaw'd, which like a waxen image against a fire bears no impression of the thing it was. It's a statement, it's not a question. Slave of the passions, exactly, Ernest has just added. He's being a slave to his passions. He's just going, well, my passion is there now, so that's where I'm going. Really nice imagery there and a really nice simile. Like a waxen image against a fire bears no impression of the thing it was. So he's using this analogy of melting, of shape shifting, of change, and this kind of, I don't know as well, but you think of candles as they melt, they come down. So also I think he's using the imagery of fire, which is commonly associated with Satan and the devil and hell, to kind of help us bring us down to this negative hell, Satan, like he's a bad character decision that we're going to make about, the audience is going to make about Proteus. So there you go. And also from the start of the speech, even as one heat, another heat expels. Heat, fire, passion. If I were lighting designing this, we could make it all red. We could make it a red scene, put some red gels on there. So bears no impression of the thing it was. And he's just stating it. There's nothing, he's not asking. He's not like, well, it's a bit like that, isn't it? He's saying, well, that's just the way it is. He's just kind of taking it in, I think. He's just letting his thoughts sit with him and us, the audience. Lovely, isn't it? For now my love is thaw'd, which like a waxen image gainst a fire bears no impression of the thing it was. Rich, love it. And then we go to Valentine. Methinks my zeal to Valentine is cold, and that I love him not as I was wont. There's a lovely rhythm to the speech. Can you hear that as well? Just using this chunk as an example. We've already had previous examples, but methinks my zeal to Valentine is cold, and that I love him not as I was wont. Lovely. Simple kind of statements where he's thinking on the line. And it says, if it bears no impression of the thing it was not too solid in the first place. Exactly. So again, this idea, even this image of wax is another image of the mercurial shape shifting that Proteus has in his feelings and his emotions. An idol with clay feet. Yeah. Solid love can take the heat. 100%. If the love is made of stone, although stone is often an analogy used to describe cold things, but still, if the love was made of stone or rock, you can't bend that. You can carve it, I guess, but you can't melt it. Melting is much more, if you melt something, it wasn't solid to begin with. It wasn't too solid to begin with in the first. I was trying to think of a phrase and I was like, well, you've just said it perfectly. So yeah, it wasn't even solid enough in the first place, even though we all thought it was. And Julia still thinks it is. And this is the thing to remember about this brilliant play. Julia doesn't know a thing about this yet. So when we see her going to Milan to follow her love and do this lovely romantic speech, the audience is already thinking, oh, she's going to see him in love with Sylvia and be really heartbroken. It's this whole kind of like horror story setting you up to fail and the audience being 20 paces ahead of the characters, which is also what makes this play so freaking delightful. I love it. So, methinks my zeal to Valentine. Let's look up zeal. What do we think that means? Methinks my zeal, and that's a great word as well, zeal. Great energy or enthusiasm in pursuit of a cause or an objective. Passion, love, fervor, fire. Again, so it's another term for fire and passion. So he says, methinks my zeal to Valentine is cold. So now he's saying as well that his passion for Valentine has turned cold. Methinks, I think my passion for my best friend is cold, and that I love him not as I was wont. So this is an interesting word and phrase, which I think can sometimes, it's not want, it is won't. So make sure you say it correctly if you are doing the speech. By the way, this speech is perfect for anyone to do. Whatever gender you are, I think this is a fabulous part. And I think having Proteus as a woman or a trans actor would be freaking amazing. So won't is one's customary behavior in a particular situation. The habit of doing something, and accustomed. Make or be or become accustomed. Wont thy heart to thoughts hereof. He was wont to arise at 5:30 every morning. He was inclined to do that. He was accustomed to do that. So what he's saying here is that I think my passion for Valentine is now cold, and that I love him not as much as I did before. So not only are we seeing his mercurial, shape-shifting, backstabbing nature, no, not backstabbing, it's more of his change, isn't it? His twisting nature with Julia and Sylvia, because he only just saw her. He might have seen her and not actually thought she was all that hot. Maybe it was just Valentine's praise that made him think she's the best thing in the world. Either way, we're seeing him change. We're seeing him say one thing to another person and then absolutely backtrack on that in the next breath. And also, actually, what's quite interesting is to reiterate that some more. I was just having a quick look because I swear he says something to Valentine in the scene about being like best friends, but maybe it's earlier on in the play. Valentine is saying, and is she not a heavenly saint? Proteus says, no, but she is an earthly paragon. Valentine says, call her divine. Proteus says, I will not flatter her. So he's not even if he is feeling all this stuff, he's not showing it to Valentine. So already this makes me think he does know what he's doing, because he's trying to manipulate Valentine. So Valentine is is not suspicious that he's even got the hots for Sylvia. And I think that is, again, reiterated in this methinks my zeal to Valentine is cold. He's not being honest with his best friend. Zealot. Yes, here we go. So Ernest says, comes from biblical times. Zealot was a Jewish sect. Did Shakespeare want to invoke a biblical reference? Don't think he used autofill while writing. He chose this on purpose, but what was his purpose? I may be going down a rabbit hole here. Not necessarily. Let me go back to that definition. So it's from Greek zelos, late Middle English, zele, fervor. What zeal means in the Bible. So it says zeal is often used in a religious sense, meaning devotion to God or other religious cause, like being a missionary. Zeal doesn't have to be religious, though. A feeling of gusto and enthusiasm for anything can be called zeal. That's from vocabulary.com. So I don't know if he is necessarily... I think what he's saying here is that it is loyalty. It is my passion, my love, my loyalty for my friend has run cold, and I don't feel the way I did before. So I don't know if there is a religious context there. Methinks my zeal to Valentine is cold, and that I love him not as I was wont. I mean, you could translate it just for an experiment to play around a little bit. Like, I feel like my zeal to my religion. You know, his belief thus far has been that Valentine is his best friend. And this is what I mean. It's a coming of age story. It's about segregation of friendships. It's about the change and the development of that, depending on each character's wants and choices. And not necessarily anything wrong with that. You know, I don't really talk to many of my school friends anymore, and that's quite a recent thing. But we're very different people. We have very different ideals, and that's okay. And I'm absolutely at peace with that. And I wish them well. So I don't know if it's, you know, maybe I feel like it's more about the whole loyalty, friendship, passion thing than a religious thing, perhaps. The divine reference earlier had you on this track. In the previous scene, well, it's the same scene, sorry, but in the previous page, conversation with Valentine, call her divine, I will not flatter her. Interesting. Heavenly saint, earthly paragon. He's saying, yeah, maybe that's triggered, maybe as Shakespeare's writing it, that triggered in his brain these religious analogies, symbols and everything, made him use the word zeal. But also I think the sound z is quite I think personally he might have picked that word because he's talking a lot about fire. His behavior is quite sinful, and the z sound is just very. It sounds silly, but I'm not going to say it sounds silly because I don't think it sounds silly. It's just my brain and the way I think, and I think that's perfect. Not perfect, but you know what I mean. It's okay. Z is the last letter of the alphabet. It's like the lowest of the low. So I think, again, using that word subliminally reinforces that he's becoming the lowest of the low, the bacteria, the dirt, the soil, the base character, like Edmund and Lear, the use of base. He's becoming the lowest of the low. Methinks my zeal to Valentine is cold, and that I love him not as I was wont. I love him not. I think my love for him is running cold, and I don't love him as much as I did. It's a statement again. He's realizing this and stating it. He's not despairing about it. There's no exclamation mark there. But then he does say, oh, but. So that does make me think that he is saying, like, oh God, I'm kind of backstabbing my best friend, actually. So now he's gone from Julia. Now he's talking about his best friend a little bit more and being like, oh, I'm actually screwing him over a little bit by doing this. Oh, but I don't care. I love his lady too much. Of course, we see what we look for. Indeed. And it says Shakespeare's writing is divine. Of course it is. That's why we're still here talking about it, isn't it? Rodney says he is not just diverting attention of his own interest woman. He's talking her down to Valentine, maybe to convince him she is plain, all the while personally really wanting the woman. Twofold benefit. Yeah. And this is the whole forerunner to Iago thing. He says one thing to one character, makes them believe one thing, and then changes it with someone else and makes them believe another thing. He's very good at showing each person something that sends them off the track, that throws the scent in the other direction. And that's what people say, I think, when they say, scholars say that he is a forerunner to Iago. Interest in the woman. Ernie says, yes, I could certainly see Shakespeare doing that in prose and real life. And Rodney says, yes, very Iago-like. Abso-freaking-lutely. So coming back to that then, methinks my zeal to Valentine is cold, and that I love him not as much as I was wont. Oh, then we got that oh, exclamation mark. It is a gift. Do not overlook it. Oh, like maybe it comes out a little bit more here, the guilt, but he's actually not saying, oh, he doesn't go on and say, oh, I'm a horrible man. I'll be true to Valentine. He says, oh, but I love his lady too much. He uses love. He uses his lady. So he already knows he doesn't have possession of her. Not that women are possessions, but back in these days, they certainly were used as possessions. Too much. It's not too much. It's not I love his lady a lot. It's too much. There's a force within Proteus that is extending over the ordinary realms of love, and it is becoming this force as by strength, as one nail by strength drives out another. I feel like it's almost like he's on a horse and cart, and the horses are galloping off, and he's going with that. That's what is galloping here, and you can sense it in the rhythm. Methinks my zeal to Valentine is cold, and that I love him not as much as I was wont. Oh, but I love his lady too much, and that's the reason I love him so little. Like he's justifying it now. I love his lady too. There's got to be some kind of force within him, or real drive. Think of that nail being driven out in that line, and in that O as well. I think it's not, oh, I feel bad about Valentine. It's, oh, she is sexy. She is hot. She is what I want and need right now. Ernest says, Iago is one of my favorite Shakespeare characters, says something bad about me. No, but I think he's one of the best explorations of an extremity of human nature and human behavior. So it's nothing bad about you. I think he's an interesting character and often people's favorite because he reveals a side to a lot of us that we don't have within us because he is a psychopath. That's what I think. And this is why I got really into these books. what was it called? Let me find it on my Kindle. This book in particular about this woman and her husband, because it was really going into the mental edge that this person had, which in some levels, you know, surely the military prefer those kinds of people. I think Punisher is my favorite Marvel spin-off character because he has part of him that can disassociate and not connect. There's a robotronic side to him. And I think it's the same with Proteus, and I think it's the same with Iago. The book's really, really interesting. I highly recommend you check it out. One of them was called I Survived, which was about a man who tried to kill his wife with a parachute. But anyway, Victoria someone. But the other one I read, where is it? Oh. That's strange. It's not there. Did I read it? Have I made up the whole story? I don't know. But it's really, really interesting. Why is that not in my Kindle? I must have undownloaded it or whatever. Removed it. Bizarre. It's gone. 'Tis gone. Poof. 'Has disappeared. No idea. But I think that's what we find fascinating. This is why I love true crime and stuff, right? Is looking into people's psyches and like, what has made that person do that? What are they lacking? Or what do they have that the majority of us don't have that turns us into absolutely manipulative, backstabbing, horrible, evil people? So anyway, strong villains make for a compelling storyline, says Rodney. And Ernest says, true that. It is true. So yeah, anyway, carrying on. Oh, but I love his lady too much. And that's the reason I love him so little. And there's a full stop at the end of there as well. So it's not like, oh, and that's the reason I love him too little. Oh no, it's just, and that's the reason I love him too little. Like, he's quite matter of fact in places. So again, it makes me think of this kind of like military precision, maybe like in Punisher, where Frank Castle is being methodical about this stuff. He's just going, okay, well, that's that. So therefore this is this, and therefore he must die, or therefore I must stab him in the back, or therefore I'm going to cross him over. Do you know what I mean? Can turn on a dime. Definitely. Why? Explain that line. Oh, which one? Something I said or the line here? But I love his lady too much, and that's the reason I love him so little. Type away, Ernest. Let me know what you're talking about. And that's the reason I love him so little. And again, so little. It's not that's the reason I love him little or a bit little. It's so little. Words like to with two O's and so, Shakespeare uses very well with the iambic. So really don't overlook them. They're quite boring words. You know, little is probably the more operative word, but I would disagree. I think so little is really important to say there. It's not just little, it's so little, it's minuscule. So yeah. And it says, yes, that one. Oh, but I love his lady too much, and that's the reason I love him so little. That line. So he's saying, oh, it's like some sort of passion fire within him, something coming out of him then. But I love his lady too much. He loves the guy's girl. Does that diminish his affection for the guy? Does he project him being a cuckold? Oh, okay. And thus can't respect him. I don't even, again, I think it's a lot more surface with Proteus. Shapeshifters change on the surface, right? They're still the same person inside. So little, literally an operatic aria phrase. So classic, so classic. Interesting. Rodney's our resident opera professional. So yeah, but I love his lady too much, and that's the reason I love him so little. I see what you're saying, Ernest, now. Yes. So for those of you that don't know, if you were cuckolded as a man, if you were considered a cuckold, you were someone whose wife was essentially cheating on you or sleeping with other men. It's used in Hamilton again. You made the wrong brother a cuckold or something. So yeah, so that's really interesting actually. But I love his lady too much, and that's the reason I love him so little. The thing is, he's not fornicated the love yet. He's not that they've not. She's not even seen him. She's not even met Proteus yet. I mean, maybe she's seen him, but nothing's actually happened yet, right? Which makes me think it isn't perhaps as in depth as you're thinking, because nothing's happened. And I don't think he necessarily thinks anything will happen, but he's going to try and make something happen. And that's the premise, I think, by the end of this speech is, if I can check my erring love, I will. If not, to compass her, I'll use my skill. I will actually make something happen of this. I think that's what is being said. Sorry, my neighbor is doing something with some people that are doing work next door, and our landlords are away, so we're kind of in charge to make sure that that's okay. Oh, I might have to dash off. It's open, they can go in. Be right back. I've got to quickly check what's going on. I'm so sorry. Forgive me. Look at me all in black today as well. Funny stuff. So, thank you for waiting. I had to quickly sort that out. And just check everything's okay, but the door's open, everyone's okay, can get where they need to get to. Totally lost my train of thought. Love these little impromptu interludes that Pippa has. She's a hoot. It's just chaos. That's what it is, Ernest. Let's have a little read here again. He talks himself into it. He's an easy sell. Yeah, he goes with the flow. And I think the audience probably will help him, because they'll be all like, oh, do you know what I mean? And that's what's so good when I did this play in the round, open air theatre, like people were getting involved and they were like, what? You're doing this? Boo, I can't believe it. No. Like, they can get really passionate and excited about it. And I think that will just spur him on. And that's, again, why we love it. We love to hate Iago. We love to hate Proteus. So that was it. The cuckold debate. I think it's more surface than that. He's just essentially saying the nail of strength that Sylvia has is driving out the nail of love that he had for Valentine. So Sylvia is like the hammer, or the stronger nail being forced in. And she's just overpowering everything else in a nutshell. So I love what you're saying. And I think definitely more that could go somewhere. And if you want to take that and run with that, totally do. And that's the reason I love him so little. I think the O also lends itself more to, it's just that my passion for her is overtaking me. And because nothing has happened yet. Interesting, but really good point. And I think that's absolutely valid. And fundamentally, by the end of the play, he does try and make Valentine a cuckold by raping Sylvia. That's pretty much what happens. So, spoiler alert. So, so that's the reason I love him so little, full stop. And then we get into how. So notice how he's saying methinks that, you know, so the remembrance, he's just talking about this. Now there's a gear shift in this speech where he's saying, how am I going to make this happen? So there is a decision change there. And there is a moment where he says, okay, well, I've talked about this for long enough. I feel bad for Valentine, but I fancy her too much. So how do we go about this then? So I think there is a turning point here. Strange metaphor. Never seen a nail drive another nail, but I know back in the day, nails had flatter heads, and I guess they could do that. I'm not too sure, actually. That's really, really interesting. I think as well, a lot like metal work was probably not as advanced. I know obviously that it was very good, but would nails traditionally have been wooden the majority of the time. And therefore easier to drive out and split, if you know what I mean. Something more work for you to do, my fellow actors, to look into that. So then we've got that gear shift. How shall I dote on her with more advice that thus without advice begins to love her? So it's kind of a question, but it's only got an exclamation mark here, which is very interesting. In this edition anyway, this isn't my edition of choice, but it was the lightest weight one I had that I can carry with me. So this is the Alexander text of complete works, but I do recommend you look up a few other editions as well. How shall I dote on her? So let's have a little look at these word definitions wise. Dote. Extremely and uncritically fond of. Uncritically is important for Proteus here. Lavish someone with affection or gifts. Be silly or feeble-minded, especially as a result of old age. Oh, interesting. And it's actually from Middle Dutch doten, which is be silly, or which then developed into dote, act or talk foolishly in Middle English. Uncertain origin. Really, really interesting. Okay, so how shall I dote on her with more advice? How shall I... And I think when you dote, you tend to dote on the ones you love, right? Like act silly with... you know, when you're in love, you are a bit more flirty and all of those sorts of things. I think dote for me is just dote, like I will do anything for you. You'd do anything for that person, perhaps. And it says maybe flatter points. Yes, maybe they were wooden. Who knows? How shall I dote on her with more advice that thus without advice begins to love her? So this is a very clever line, a little bit tricky. So we've got dote. Let's just look up advice. Guidance or recommendations offered with regard to prudent future action. A formal notice of a financial transaction. Intriguing. And if you take advice, you are taking guidance, aren't you, really? Counselling, help. Also says direction there as a similar word. So how shall I dote on her with more guidance that thus without guidance begins to love her? I really love this line. So the way I would translate that is, how shall I woo her? How shall I love her with more logic and guidance that thus without logic begins to love her? Does that make sense? Let me know. How shall I woo on her with more sense, even though I love her without sense? He's cleverly bringing up the contradiction of, like, I love her without reason, reasonless to reasonless. Therefore, why should I woo her with reason? So this is where I think it can get very dark. So again, spoiler alert, he fundamentally tries to grab Sylvia towards the end of the play and I think potentially just rape her, right? And he's saying, like, how, if this force is within me, how can I logically woo and dote on her logically as well? So I think he's already excusing his behavior now. My brain hurts, says Is there anything specific I should reiterate there? How shall I dote on? And actually, this does make sense why it's an exclamation mark as well. He's not he's actually genuinely not asking here, which makes me think he is more sick. Actually, this has made me feel like I really struggle with Proteus now. Actually, how shall I dote on her with more advice that thus without advice begins to love her? How shall I woo her with more logic than the fact is, when the fact is I have no logic, but I still love her? I think he's saying here, I can do what I don't have to have a reason to my actions. Also, another reason why Iago is such an interesting character. Racism is probably the key one, but it's never that crystal clear. Hierarchy and racism is probably like what we'd think, but he's his friend. Othello thinks Iago is his friend. There's no real reason why he hates him so much, even though there's like potential reasons, we still don't really know what ticks Iago along, like what happened in his, there's not a lot of something's happened and then Iago's changed. He's just in the off as this asshole character. So yeah, how shall I dote on her with more advice, that thus without advice begin to love her? To love her? Love her. When I go down, I make it more of a question. Interesting. Really, really interesting. Ernest says, I need to unpack the how shall I dote lines. This may be great writing, but I don't see it yet. Stay tuned. I think swapping out the advice line and thinking like, if you dote on someone, it would normally as well be with words and actions like roses, or like, here's some medicine, or here's some water, or here's a nice dress. Like, it's flattering someone, I think. So how shall I flatter her with more guidance? He's trying to think now, how can I woo her and get her on my side and loving me and not Valentine, when I don't actually have any logic for loving her? Like, it's all surface level for him right now. He doesn't know a thing about it. He doesn't know what she loves and what she likes and what her favorite color is. He can't pick the right roses for her or anything yet. You know what I mean? So I think it is this kind of, how shall I woo her with more, how can I woo her well when loving her is an unwell action? I don't know if that will help or not, but keep working on it. Send me an email once you've got it, if it lands. But yeah, I think how shall I love her? How shall I get her to love me? Maybe even. Well, it's not. It says dote on her. How can I woo on her with more logic? I think logic works for me, but find what works for you. With more logic, when without logic, I've begun to love her. He's highlighting the contradiction of that. How can I use my brain to love her when I don't have a brain, because I've just started loving her without my brain, without my logic? Good. And there's that lovely exclamation mark. So I think there is some sort of passion building up in there as well, perhaps. Was English a second language for Shakespeare? I don't think it was, but he definitely knew Latin and all of that jazz, didn't he? He was a very well-schooled young man. Moving on, what time are we on? Ay, caramba. 'Tis but her picture I have yet beheld, and that hath, this is such a good line. 'Tis but her picture I have yet beheld, and that hath dazzled my reason's light. So again, it's this Z's thing. I'm just kidding. So funny. Lots of Z's. Zeal, dazzled, my reasons light. There's lots of zzz. If something buzzes, it's normally, like a bee or something. Really funny. Really, really, I think it's reiterating the baseness of Proteus, the Z, the lowest letter, the lowest, this Z. He is like he's not hissing, but he's buzzing around. I don't know. It reiterates that for me. So 'tis but her picture. It's just her image I have seen, I have yet beheld, I have held within my hands. I don't think he's literally had a picture given to him. I can't remember, but he's seen her walk by, and that has dazzled my reason's light. Going back to reason again being a reason is your logic, is your brain, it's your moral compass, right? Seeing her image has absolutely thrown out of whack my system for my capacity for logic. Reason's light. And again, light, this image of heaven. If it's reason's light, it's the goodness. So we're getting, even though he talks about reason's light here, we are getting dark here, I think. 'Tis but her picture I have yet beheld, and that hath dazzled my reason's light. But when I look on her perfections, there is no reason, but I shall be blind. So again, light, blindness, looking, blindness. He's using these opposing images here to help us understand the darkness that is perhaps coming on Proteus. And top tip, like, I don't recommend that this means it becomes very sinister. I don't think that, but I think he doesn't necessarily realize how dark he is getting here. He's essentially saying, I'm going to force this to happen. And forcing a relationship to happen with a woman or anyone is abuse. It is, on a physical level, rape. Like, he is talking about making and forcing it happen. And of this time, that would have happened so often. Like, we talk about it a lot in the sonnets, because I think it's very relevant in the sonnets, but there would have been a lot of pushing these things to happen. Like, look at Shakespeare in Love. She doesn't marry who she wants to love. She's forced to marry so-and-so and have babies with him because that's the way it's going to be. So, yeah, I think it's highlighting the evil in mankind in this speech without getting too dark. That's me putting my kind of deeper spin on it if we want to get a bit deeper with it. But I do think with Proteus, he is still a bit like, okay, well, I know it's bad. He's keeping it light. He knows he's bad, but he's going to really enjoy it. And that's what Iago does, which makes him so enjoyable as well. So it's just her image I have yet held in my hand, and that hath dazzled my reason's light, that has confused my sense of reason. But when I look on her perfections, there is no reason, but I shall be blind. And obviously that as well is a reference to Cupid. Cupid was blind, going back to Helena's speech in Midsummer Night's Dream, the idea that, and therefore is winged Cupid painted blind because he's just reckless. And reckless is a good word, actually, I think, for Proteus. He's just shooting his arrow wherever. Like, oh, sometimes love is blind and acts foolishly. That's kind of the premise behind there. So, but I shall be blind. I shall be love. I shall be Cupid, he's also saying here, perhaps. So again, although he knows it's wrong, he's worming his way through to make it right. Crazy. But when I look on her perfections, there is no reason, but I shall be blind. He's just saying, this is the decision he's making here. He's not saying I'm going to be blind because of this. He's saying, because she's like that, there is no reason, but I shall be blind. And again, it's a statement. And then we've got the final couplet. Does all that make sense? If I can check my erring love, I will. If not, to compass her, I'll use my skill. If I can check my erring love, if I can stop it, if I can check it, if I can cross it off. As well is air. Air, it says here, but I would say erring, but that's up for debate. Be mistaken or incorrect. Make a mistake. Fail to adhere to the proper accepted standards. Do wrong. If I can check my wrong love, I will. If not, and again, this shows his shape-shifting nature. He should end it there. If I can check my erring love, I will. But he doesn't. He then says, but if not, to compass her, to guide her, I'll use my skill. I'll make it happen. I'll use my double-sided, backstabbing, mercurial, shape-shifting nature to make it happen. I will force it to happen. So already we're seeing how contradictory he is in his behavior. Yeah, if I can stop it, I will. But if I can't, then I just won't. We've all met someone like that, right? Like, oh yeah, if I'll be there, if I can be there on time, I will. But if I can't, I won't. It's like so stupid and annoying. But people are like that. And it's like obvious, right? Like, well, obviously, if you can't be there, just let me know. But he's saying here, if I can stop it, I will, but I won't. It's such a good couplet to finish on. And I love this speech. This is why I picked it. I think it's fabulous. I think the whole play, there are countless brilliant speeches in this play. So please read it, everyone. If I can check my erring love, I will. Erring love does sound good, doesn't it? Erring love. I prefer, I tell you why I prefer erring love in this context, not necessarily all of Shakespeare's plays or speeches with air in it. Erring. It makes me think of and stuttering and staccato-ness. So I feel like if I can check my erring love, my jarring love. It makes me think of that. So I would be more inclined to say that as an actor and make that decision for myself. But it's completely up to you. Possible to get Wednesday's assignment earlier. I was giving blood yesterday while reading this passage. It explains my lightheadedness. Yes, of course. I will do that. I haven't sorted out the schedule just yet because I've been busy and haven't planned it, basically. But yes, I will let you know further ahead. Going to reread Two Gents now. I can usually get Shakespeare, but for this humble reading, it means prep work. Is smart. I smart, but not real big smart. You'll get it. And try not to worry too much about it. Again, remember, Shakespeare, let it wash over you. I think this is a very shape-shifting speech, so I think it can be a little bit tricky to follow. But overall, in the context of the scene that's just happened with him and Valentine, it would be a lot clearer if we weren't just plucking it out. So watch a version of it. I'm sure I think there's an RSC version in it. You can see with quite a few Bristol Vic grads in it, actually. I've totally forgotten which year it was done. Anyway, we'll get there. Let's read it one more time and let's see what comes of it this time. This is Proteus, Act 2, Scene 4 from the Two Gentlemen of Verona. Pardon me. Let me have a swig. Even as one heat, another heat expels, or as one nail by strength drives out another, so the remembrance of my former love is by a newer object quite forgotten. Is it my mind, or Valentine's praise, her true perfection, or my false transgression that makes me reasonless to reason thus? She is fair, and so is Juliet that I love, that I did love. For now my love is thaw'd, which like a waxen image gainst a fire bears no impression of the thing it was. Methinks my zeal to Valentine is cold, and that I love him not as I was wont. Oh, but I love his lady too much, and that's the reason I love him so little. How shall I dote on her with more advice that thus without advice begin to love her? 'Tis but her picture I have yet beheld, and that hath dazzled my reason's light. But when I look on her perfections, there is no reason, but I shall be blind. If I can check my erring love, I will. If not, to compass her, I'll use my skill. Interesting. I actually wanted to say erring love then. That came up for me, but I changed it to erring. If I can check my erring love, I will. Erring love. Erring. Interesting. Up for debate. Pick what you want. I tend to think more but air is a lovelier vowel. Air. Diphthong, trithong type thing. Oh my God, the builders just threw a tool at each other and I thought it was going to whack him in the head. Brilliant. So let's leave it there. That was long enough, wasn't it? Jeez Louise, I didn't realize how long these ones would take. Ernest says, for months I thought you were saying Bristol Old Vic, not Bristol Old Vic. I thought, well, maybe she studied in Prague or something. Bristol Old Vic. Bristol Old Vic. Bristol Vic. No, Bristol Old Vic. Sorry. Bristol Old Vic. It's my accent being Old Vic rather than doing the D. Bristol Old Vic. That was Proteus from Two Gentlemen of Verona. Still loads more depth we could go into there and lots of things we could debate and argue with. We could make him a really sinister, evil kind of asshole. But the brilliance about that play is that we love to hate him. The brilliance in Othello is that we love to hate Iago. We love to hate Edmund in Lear. We love to hate characters. And He's a young kid at the end of the day who's just traveled abroad for the first time and had his eyes wide open. And so he's figuring it out. I really hope that was all helpful. If you have any recommendations or requests, should I say, for speeches to do over the following weeks, I do want to put a little bit of a rota up over the next few weeks. And actually, I'll have to think about Christmas week. Christmas is on a Saturday this year, isn't it? So that should be fine. But it'd be lovely to know what you would like me to look at next over the next few weeks. I am going to keep doing this for the rest of December at least. It might not go on into the new year. As you can see, it's taking quite a long time to get through each speech. But we will do something else live, Shakespeare related maybe, or acting related on the YouTubes. I'd love to know your thoughts and feelings if you've got any ideas for that. Otherwise, we might just do some readings together or something. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. Make sure you subscribe to my newsletter if you haven't already. I share with you acting tips and advice and also any thoughts I'm feeling. It's a bit like a blog, but also quite a useful one that actually gives you some tips and advice and things. And it's been a pleasure to have you both here. Thank you so much for joining, everyone. And I will catch you next time for a speech a week with me, Pippa Moss. Toodaloo for now.